The Indo-European family. Preliminary. In my second synthesis paragraph, I left a cliffhanger on how I would have presented an overview of the Indo-European languages. I'm sure that, since then, Mr. has been experiencing sleepless nights and head-spinning showers, anticipating what was not presented in front of him. I should start with an apology for this heinous act. I only hope he can forgive me. Now, I shall present to him, or any reader, my awaited product. Introduction. What is it that gives unto us family? With the arrival of ChatGPT, the more is here, the possibility of overestimating where AI remains currently. To step back for a second, I am going to assume that the reader is likely a human being, who, not being written into existence by loops, was instead birthed into a family. Languages, likewise, are not usually created, but rather hatch from a family. What is it that is the essence of family? It is, of course, relation. You have a unique relation to your sister, mother, aunt or grandma, as a language, say English, has to Dutch, Norse, or Gothic. How exactly do we find these relations? For people, it is much easier. We can check through certificates and censuses, censi, or simply let one tell us the relation of one to another. Languages, unfortunately, give us a much more intensive headache. Neither do they announce to us to which family they belong, nor how they relate to members of their own species. It is up to us to map the relation of languages, as we have done with life. Let us now discuss the classic example, the holy grail of language families, which to the science of linguistics gave the breath of life, the Indo-European family. Reconstruction. Emergence of science. For many a millennia, mankind has wondered whence his speech came from. Truth be told, it still remains a mystery, though it would be dishonesty to claim we haven't advanced. How then have we done so? Since the Enlightenment of the extended 18th century, a new subject arose, from its predecessors in India, China, Egypt, Greece, Mesopotamia, and most immediately, the caliphates of the Golden Age. This subject, named science, was a behemoth in exponentially expanding our knowledge in several fields, including the field of linguistics. The purpose of science is to apply the scientific method, which contains within it methodological naturalism. Now the question, where in science does linguistics dwell? Science can be dissected into two major branches, each encompassing its own range of fields. Firstly, natural sciences, which itself consists of life sciences and physical sciences. Secondly, social sciences, wherein our subject of concern is situated. Emergence of modern linguistics. Linguistics, much like many other fields, has its origins far beyond what we would call modern history, but modern linguistics began with but one simple speech, presented by philologist Sir William Jones before the Royal Asiatic Society in the 18th century. The Sanskrit language, whatever be its antiquity, is of a wonderful structure, more perfect than the Greek, more copious than the Latin, and more exquisitely refined than either, yet bearing to both of them a stronger affinity, both in the roots of verbs and the forms of grammar, than could possibly have been produced by accident, so strong indeed, that no philologer could examine them all three, without believing them to have sprung from some common source, which, perhaps, no longer exists. There is a similar reason, though not quite so forcible, for supposing that both the Gothic and the Celtic, though blended with a very different idiom, had the same origin with the Sanskrit, and the Old Persian might be added to the same family. This truly is what separates modern linguistics from its ancestors, the reconstruction of extinct languages that bore upon this earth living descendants. Proto-languages. The proto-language in question here is the ancestor of what we call the Indo-European languages. It is, hence, referred to as Proto-Indo-European, PI. Now, we are led to another question. How do we reconstruct this language? Comparative linguistics. To understand how to reconstruct a language, we must first understand how language evolves. Let us examine the three languages that birthed this theory: Sanskrit, Greek and Latin. As we can see, the sound correspondences are too regular to be a coincidence, yet they are not the same for each word. Have they an ancestor? They must have jumped through a sound shift to get to where they are today. In addition to the above-mentioned languages, English, too, is present. Why not we examine it as well? The oldest form of English we have is named Old English, of the 7th to 11th centuries. Let us compare it to a more recent form. We see that the English of today is much different, but why? The answer has to do with another documented event. The influx of French vocabulary into English around the time of the Norman conquest, which will hinder us when attempting to reconstruct its immediate ancestor. This teaches us yet another lesson: to search for the oldest possible form of a language, since it would have had less time to alter and so will be of much similar form to its ancestor. Though similar to the evolution of life, it is apparent that the evolution of languages is distinct in the sense that languages, which may not be too closely related, can inject into each other in the way that living organisms cannot. Now, we are well equipped when we need to put together pi. We look for the oldest languages of this family that we can find, filter out loanwords of foreign origin and trace back sound shifts. This naturally begs us with one final question. Further reconstruction. Is it possible that pi was related to another language? We hold not only that it is possible, but inevitable. Alas, we can only reconstruct this far. The correspondences between sound shifts and common grammar can only take us so far into the past. Instead of looking to where Indo-European may be a branch, let us examine the Indo-European branches themselves. Branches? Is this botany? You may ask. No, we mean branch in a slightly different way. Akin to how you are more closely related to some members of your family than others, languages tend to, also, be closely related to some and more distantly related to others in their family. Usually, languages that are more closely related share a more recent common ancestor. I wish to end this section by mentioning that comparative linguistics has, in addition to this family, helped us construct many more, such as Afro-Asiatic, Dravidian and Uralic. In addition, we have also seen the emergence of a family that turned out to be false, Altaic, thanks to our strict standards. Now, I shall finally discuss the living descendants of pi today, in the various branches of the family where they belong. Branches. Starting from the westernmost branch, Germanic, to the easternmost branch, Indo-Iranian, we shall touch on each branch still represented in some form today, with one very important exception. Germanic. Over the latter half of the first millennium BC, Proto-Germanic was spoken by the Germanic people around Scandinavia. Soon enough, there arose three distinct dialects, each becoming its own sub-branch with its own languages within it. Let us see this trio in greater detail. West Germanic. The West Germanic branch includes, within itself, the most spoken of all the Germanic languages, English, German and Dutch. While Dutch and German are quite similar, both to each other and to other Germanic languages, English seems to be the odd one out. Indeed, due to French influence, the closest languages to English are but closer to each other still. North Germanic. The languages of the Nordic nations, except Finnish, are themselves descended from a single source, Proto-Norse, spoken in between the Roman and Germanic Iron Ages. Continuing to evolve, Proto-Norse morphed into Old Norse, during the Viking Age. Today, the language has morphed into Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, Faroese and the most similar to Old Norse, Icelandic. East Germanic. Gone, but not forgotten, may be the slogan of this sub-branch. Importantly, we have, in our possession, a New Testament translation, which stands as a testament to its most attested inhabitant, Gothic. Gothic has undoubtedly lent the greatest help in the quest to reconstruct Proto-Germanic and to a certain extent, pi. Italic. Named after the famed peninsula, wherein originally a few languages were spoken around the time BC Met AD, none more influential than Latin. Latin spread throughout what we now know as the Roman Empire, in a formal, classical, form and a colloquial, vulgar, form. The Latin of the everyday people diverged over the past 2 millennia to become the Romance languages of today. Since they are the only survivors of this branch, Italic and Romance may be used interchangeably. The classical form helped us today when reconstructing pi, even more so than Old Latin, due to less writing. Romance. The specific form of Vulgar Latin whence today's Romance languages come is referred to as Proto-Romance. Today, they are spoken in the Western Mediterranean, the Americas and across Africa, not at all for different reasons. The most popular of them are Spanish, Portuguese, French and Italian, languages that truly give their branch a reason to keep its name. Celtic. I prefer to call this the We're Not English branch, although Celtic works just fine for this occasion. Before the Roman Empire, the Celtic languages, descended from Proto-Celtic, which may be further related to Proto-Italic, were spoken throughout Europe. Over the past 2 millennia, however, their numbers declined. Despite the decline, they are still spoken today, in small numbers, around the British Isles. The most well-known are Irish, Scottish and Welsh, truly, the embodiment of the phrase, "We're not English." Balto-Slavic. The Balto-Slavic branch consists of 2 sub-branches, which, from its name, anyone can easily guess, Baltic and Slavic. They are both rather special, yet for such different reasons. Let us discuss them in more detail. Baltic. There are only 2 known survivors of this branch, Latvian and Lithuanian. Lithuanian is well known among linguists for its conservation of several PIE features, such that it, too, has been of great help in its reconstruction. Unlike many other branches of this family, the Baltic languages are not mutually intelligible, largely due to a great number of loanwords of distinct origin. It may also have to do with their ancestor, Proto-Baltic, being spoken about 2.5 millennia ago. Slavic. Contrasting with the Baltic languages, the Slavic languages are much closer to one another, likely due to their more recent common ancestor, Proto-Slavic, being spoken quite recently, until around the 8th century AD. The Slavic sub-branch follows a pattern akin to Germanic. West Slavic. The Western Slavic languages are headed by Polish, Czech and Slovak, among others. They began to diverge as separate languages sometime around the 9th century. They are, hence, quite mutually intelligible and are the only Slavic subdivision that are not at each other's throats. South Slavic. Featuring the oldest Slavic language, Old Church Slavonic, this subdivision gives us déjà vu, with yet 2 more subdivisions, a Western and an Eastern. The South Slavic subdivision is highly mutually intelligible, with sometimes the only diversion being the script and names of the languages. I am going to stop now. In case the reader is of Balkan descent, I shall become Franz Ferdinand anew. East Slavic. Now we come to the final and largest division. The East Slavic languages spoken today are Rusin, Belarusian, Ukrainian and grandest of all, Russian. They are still highly intelligible with each other, due to on one hand, a recent ancestor, Old East Slavic, and on the other hand, continued contact. The relations between East Slavs rely quite heavily on which time period is being subject to assessment. Albanian. Our first isolate, we have been unable to show Albanian, whence this branch gets its name, to be closely related to any other branch. Before we move on, it has to be mentioned that Albanian may be the descendant of Illyrian, an older language, spoken in roughly the same region. We cannot say for certain, since we lack enough writing of Illyrian to make a judgment. Hellenic. The Greek or Hellenic language is a rather interesting one. Though it is considered, by most, to be a single language, there are many who propose others, such as Tsakonian and Pontic. To understand this contention, we must first understand the stages of historical development of this fine wine. Mycenaean. The earliest form of Greek in writing is from the 14th century BC, from Mycenae, written in a syllabic script, named Linear B. Mycenaean Greek is, undoubtedly, very close to Proto-Greek, and by extension PIE, but its ambiguous writing system, along with its scarcity, dims its usefulness in reconstruction. Ancient. After the Greek Dark Ages, Greece began to rebuild itself into that civilization which we now refer to as Ancient Greece. Ancient Greek refers to all the dialects that were present during the classical period, most importantly, Attic, Ionic and Doric. Ancient Macedonian is perhaps to be considered Greek, or not. Surely, no more fuss will come of this, right? Today, when students learn Ancient Greek, they are learning the Attic dialect of Athens. Due to the large amount of Ancient Greek texts, it was most useful for the reconstruction of PIE. Coin. After the conquests of Alexander, Attic Greek had merged with Ionic Greek to create Koine Greek. the new lingua franca, most notably used for writing the New Testament. It is, hence, also referred to as Biblical Greek. Medieval. As antiquity gave way to the Middle Ages, Koine gave way to medieval Greek. The Greeks, at this point in history, were the claimants to the Roman, now Byzantine, Empire. The Greek of this time is, alternatively named, Byzantine Greek. Modern. Today, that which is recognized as Greek, is spoken in a variety of dialects, all descended from the Koine dialect. The speech of contention is Psaconian, which is descended from Doric, the dialect of the Peloponnesian warriors, the Spartans. Anatolian. This is the aforementioned exception. I am mentioning this group solely for two residents, Hittite and Luwian. Hittite is the earliest Indo-European language to ever be recorded, in the cuneiform outfit about the 17th century BC. As such, it provided gentle help when reconstructing Pi. I thought to mention Luwian, as, if the descriptions provided in the Iliad are to be correct, what, to us, is Luwian, to the Greeks, would be, Trojan. Armenian. Our second confirmed isolate, Armenian, may yet further be related to other branches, such as Hellenic and Indo-Iranian, but it has still to be proven. The earliest records we have of this language are from a Bible translation from the 5th century. Fascinatingly, there are not one, but two standard forms of Armenian, Eastern and Western Armenian, which are both intelligible to one another. There exists a new theory that Armenia may be the Pi homeland. Indo-Iranian. The Proto-Indo-Iranians are believed to have lingered in Central Asia around the late 3rd millennium BC, till the early 2nd millennium BC. Soon, they began dissecting into Proto-Iranian and Proto-Indo-Aryan divisions. The closest by which we can scrape these languages are with the most archaic forms of Avestan and Sanskrit, both of which lent an enormous hand in the reconstruction of Pi. Iranian. The earliest recorded Iranian language is Avestan, the language of the Avesta, the sacred text of Zoroastrianism. The language is broken down into two stages, Old Avestan, from about the 15th century BC, and Young Avestan, from about the 10th century BC until the 5th century BC. The historical development of the Iranian languages takes place in three stages. Old Iranian. There was, likely, a cluster of diversity, but only two have been recorded. First was mentioned Avestan, but in addition came Old Persian records from the 6th century BC. While other languages have known descendants in the Middle and New eras, Avestan seems to not have, unto itself, any direct offspring. Middle Iranian. The Middle Iranian era is said to have lasted from around the 4th century BC until the 9th century AD. This period saw the gradual diversification of two different subdivisions, Western, to which the aforementioned Persian belongs, and Eastern, to which the famed horse-riding Scythians belonged. New Iranian. Unlike most other languages, the Iranian languages, uniquely, saw their literary periods in their most recent form, mostly as a refusal to be Arabized, but also as a contribution to the Islamic Golden Age. Today, the Iranian languages thrive in their namesake region. Indo-Aryan. From the 20th century, the group, known as the Indo-Aryans, migrated from Central Asia, in two directions. To the west, they settled in the, highly underrated, Mitanni Kingdom, wherefrom, our oldest writing of Sanskrit comes, from a treaty between Hittites and Mitannis. By far, their most consequential adventure, was the migration into India. From here, comes the earliest record of Sanskrit, in the form of the Vedas, a collection of hymns from about the middle 2nd millennium BC. Old Indo-Aryan. As the Indo-Aryans began to diversify, they still spoke the same tongue of the Vedas, albeit in a variety of dialects. Around the middle 1st millennium BC, Panini, the great grammarian, standardized the language, earning Sanskrit, that which is refined, its name. This standard language is referred to as Classical Sanskrit, while the archaic form from the Vedas, Vedic Sanskrit, although the same language, do have in mind the essence of a 1,000-year gap. Middle Indo-Aryan. Akin to Latin, the everyday Sanskrit of the people began to diverge into different vernacular forms, known as Prakrits, that which is natural. Sanskrit, however, almost twice as ancient as Latin, naturally, underwent this process, twice. The Prakrits represent the first stage of divergence, with three being most influential: the Eastern Maharashtri, the Central Shorasini, and the Eastern Magadhi. In the meantime, classical Sanskrit clothed the compositions of the epic Ramayana and Mahabharata. New Indo-Aryan. The Indo-Aryan languages of today are the second stage of diversification, having been known to be descended from three mentioned Prakrits: Marathi and Konkani, from Maharashtri; Hindi, Gujarati and Punjabi, from Shorasini; Bhojpuri, Odia, Assamese and my native, Bangla, from Magadhi. Today, the Indo-Aryan languages form, with the Dravidian languages, a South Asian scratchband, with the various languages influencing each other. Sanskrit still remained, with its use in the Puranas, but declined afterwards due to conquests. Though still it remains a highly important language, for cultural reasons. Conclusion. We have in this essay, hitherto, discussed the various aspects of the Indo-European languages. Starting with how we know of their connection through comparative linguistics, we then have worked our way to the construction of their ancestor, Proto-Indo-European. Our following subject of discussion concerned the mechanics of language evolution, which, although similar, should not be confused with being a carbon copy of biological evolution. Next was touched upon the tools for comparative linguistics, which has, in addition to this family, helped us reconstruct many others. They were presented, those who helped us the most on our quest, such as Vedic Sanskrit, Ancient Greek, Classical Latin, Older Western and so forth. Finally was glossed over each individual branch with either its isolates or sub-branches, listing many recognizable names within them. Despite the necessities this essay provides to the reader, with regard to linguistics, there is always much more than can be covered within a single body of text. In order to truly comprehend the mechanistics of linguistics, one must truly embark on a journey to read for oneself.